Welcome back to another edition of Scots and Socks. I'm Scott. He's Scott. And look, this week we've been pretty provocative in terms of how we've kind of shared what we want to get around today and what we want to talk about. As hopefully many of you know, Scots and Socks is really about promoting empathy in our communities, closing the empathy gap, misunderstanding, being more curious about people who are doing it hard, people who are suffering out there in the community. And also, importantly, to promote the Socks program of Scott's, which is, an incredible on-the-ground program that Scott's been running for some time now on the streets. And, that's something we like to talk about a lot because it is empathy in action from our perspective. So we expect this week we'll get quite a few comments, I suppose, and we invite those. We're very keen to hear from people about what they think about last week. And just as a headline, this particular episode is about the fact that the Victorian government last week decided to appoint a Parliamentary Secretary in charge of men's behaviour. So that obviously caught our eye in the context of, I guess, the branding of all that. Not really sure what that mandate is. I've had a bit of a dig around to see what the scope of that is, but there's not a lot of detail about that. And probably most curiously for us, it's how will something titled men's behavioural change engage men if men are indeed the problem? So I'm going to hand over to Mr. Scotty Carson, who's just coughed his lungs out, and see what he has to say about that.
Looking for the mute button. I couldn't find it for a second. And I think that goes to show you where I'm at the moment, because today I'm actually nervous about having a conversation. And in general, I'm not nervous about having conversations because I know that there's a lot of growth that will come from open dialogue, accepting that all parts for what people present are their opportunity to understand a situation. Today, we've picked a pretty big headline for this because, man-hating mandate. Why? Why did we choose that? What is our purpose behind that? Well, unfortunately, I spent a lot of time with men that are hurting. I'm spending a lot of time with men that don't have a voice anymore. Spending a lot of time with men that are really struggling with where things are at. And I think now more than ever, we need to understand that it's any gender division in violence, for me, is unacceptable. Violence is unacceptable. It's a human issue, not a gender issue. But unfortunately, we've got this society attitude to the way in which men are projected. All we need to do is look at the sitcoms and the TV shows that have been coming through for the last 30 years and see how much the male projection has changed. You know a bit about that, Scotty.
Yeah, there's a great video. I'll see if I can stick it in the event, actually, about the Homer Simpson effect. And effectively what it talks about is how men are pictured in mainstream or popular media about being overweight, alcoholic, stupid. Even to the point, I think the Simpsons one is a really interesting thing because not only is Homer depicted as being that kind of useless man, but the bad kid out of the two just happens to be the boy, and the genius just happens to be the girl. I know we overlook these things and think, oh, it's just comedy, but actually it's consistent through a lot of applications and a lot of TV shows, a lot of series and so forth, where we see the man depicted as something that's just kind of getting in the way of progress. This clumsy oaf that sort of, gets around the place and doesn't add any value. And, I often wonder what it's like to be a boy in his late teens or a young man in his early 20s, having literally grown up with that from birth, and how that branding has in fact affected his own view of himself. I'm super curious about what sort of impact that's having on our young men as they traverse the world, and a world that to them may seem inequitable. And that's a curious thing in and of itself. I think Scott and I both grew up in an era where there was a lot of misogyny and incredible amounts, and that the patriarchy that we hear people talking about was loud and proud. That is absolute truth. That is an absolute truth of the 70s and 80s that I grew up in anyway. I'm not going to, but I think that's a truth, and I guess we've lived through an era where um, there's been a lot of change sought to that for good reason, and now, but these kids are sort of growing up in a really different era where it's not about male dominance; it's about male inferiority in many ways, and certainly what we see in the media. So, I guess for me personally, when I see a title like that, or I see we have a minister for domestic violence in Victoria, and domestic violence headlines a lot in the media. It is an issue. It's always an issue. Whether the incidence is falling or growing is inconsequential. I don't want to minimise that at all, or minimise the impact it has on families. And we see a lot of women fleeing those scenarios. Scott certainly engages with them on the street, living in their cars with their children. The outcries and the impact are bloody horrific. But the reason we were contentious is that I can't see, personally, I'm going to speak for me here, Scotty, I can't see how the way it's been positioned, branded, and delivered so far is going to engage men. And so if the idea is that we want to engage men in a change, and we do, Scott and I are very dedicated to that, and we can explain that a little further. But if we want to engage men in such a change, how are we going to get there telling them that they need to change, that there's something wrong with them? That, I don't know. I'm just, call me basic, but I'm a beast, beast to honey kind of guy. I just don't understand how that's going to engage the greater audience. I really don't. So just checking to see if there's any comments on this so far, but
No,
Scotty.
well, look, it's a daunting conversation, right? Even to be involved in, because very emotive conversation. And the headline was chosen to see how you feel. How did you feel seeing that man-hating mandate? How do you feel with that? Because there's a lot of men getting around with that in them, and it's a big opportunity for men to work through at the minute. We're going to talk about something that I think is really important, and it's where we get our information from, where we get things projected to us from, because all data around domestic violence, around homicide, it's all pointing to a massive decrease in Australia. Massive decrease. It's halved. So I can understand why we fear it, because it's terrible, right? But what's the purpose of it? What's the purpose of this really big push at the moment? And I don't have the answers to that, but all I know is there's $3.2 billion in funding going towards domestic violence of men against women. $3.2 billion. That's a lot of money. How are we?
Yeah, and
what are we doing? Hang on, Scott. I want to keep going here, because this is something that I really want to challenge people on, because in our current climate, there is the bear versus man. Who would a woman prefer to go into the forest with? The bear v man. Overwhelmingly, women who responded to that meme or gesture chose bear. The scary thing for me was a young female psychologist, 28 years old, who is working with supporting our community with their well-being and headspace. Outrightly said, I choose the bear in a heartbeat. I choose the bear in a heartbeat. We've got a comment there coming through in a sec, right? And I want to grab that. Anger. Can you grab that comment, Scotty, and put it up?
Yep.
So this here is my point, right? Manhandling comes from anger, and anger perpetuates the problem. Everything is now worse because of these groups. It's not actually worse. What is worse is the way we feel about it.
Yeah.
What we need to do is have open dialogue to be able to understand each other and create questions. I think this is the part of this, right? We projected man-hating mandate. Do Scott and I actually believe that, in society, that is exactly what is going on? I know a lot of good men. You know a lot of good men? Do you know a lot of good men, Scotty?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And yet we all get tarred with one brush.
Mhm.
I'm going to sit with, I'm going to
I know, and
project
I
something.
know a lot of not very good women as well, but anyway, that's a whole other point. Um,
Yeah. I think you've got to take it away from gender completely and look at the aspect that we're all
I
human,
agree.
right? What are the values we need to do for one another? What do we need to do to create a safe place for us to actually be the unique humans that we are? I was having a
Mhm.
conversation yesterday with an amazing guy, and I want to invite dialogue around this on how we can call people in, because he's a Maori guy who grew up in New Zealand and has had a pretty significant past. I'm going to grab that too in a second, that comment that's just come through,
Mm.
which is perfect because it is about the perceptions and not about the act. But
Totally
right
about
now, I'll tell you
perception.
about the action that actually happened. I was sitting there having a conversation with this fantastic guy, and I asked him, about life, as I do. One of my big things that I really enjoy doing is learning people and what made them them. Now, we're talking about how he felt as a man in today's society. He goes, I don't know what a man is anymore. 70 years old. He said, I've got no idea. All I know
Mhm.
is that one of the greatest things I've done in my life is learn to control or respond better to the situations that I go through. I learned that drinking wasn't good for me, and it created an anger which I then put into my children.
Mhm.
That is my biggest pain. We shared this conversation and back and forth. And it was a beautiful conversation. And I said to him, I said, if you had to pin it down to one thing that would allow things to change, what would it be? Okay, it's responsibility, self-responsibility. I said, where are you safe enough to admit that you could do better? Where were you safe? He goes, nowhere. I've never had anywhere where I've been able to sit and just work through things. Like I think throughout the ages,
Mhm.
men have worked really hard, right? And we live in a really different world now. We live in a world of abundance. We don't have to work as physically hard as what we once did. I mean, when I first started in construction, I was using a crowbar, pick, and a shovel to dig trenches. These days, you've got
Mhm.
machines, right? We don't have to do the physical stuff anywhere near as much as we used to. So we're learning about different things and the impact we have upon one another. And I think that's been the greatest thing that we've been given in recent years is abundance. What is life really about? What is it really about?
Mm.
Well, if you look at the end of your days and you spend time with people who are at the end of their days, they'll tell you what life's about as they're reflecting upon it. And it all comes down to the
Yep.
heart. It comes down to the things that we did wrong that really hold us in the shame and the regret. So, how do we support each other to not make those decisions? That's something that I really want to investigate. And I want to call people into. I want to call people into those situations. Scotty, you leant forward because you got
Mm.
something to put in there.
Oh, look, there's some obvious stuff that I want to call out. In my time on the government and social side of the fence, I've seen a lot of statements be made. Unfortunately, not followed by a lot of activity or action. So that's a call out. Let's just call that out for what it is. Um, politicians are famous for making statements and not really doing anything, throwing it to department and hoping that someone makes a fist of it. But I think the other thing that's really coming to mind here is that when we talk about domestic violence and we actually have a look at the criminology statistics around offences that committed, particularly during COVID, it was really, really obvious that what we see as traditional domestic family violence or physical domestic family violence didn't necessarily increase when we know anecdotally in certain geographies it went through the roof. So we had women fleeing their homes in the very same suburbs that we saw a flat line of reported offences. So what does that tell you, right? And I wonder whether the way the government takes headline approaches to these things, whether we are in fact, targeting the one percenters all the time, the ones that hit the headlines, the guy who loses his mind on methamphetamine and sets fire to a car, or, you know, that kind of stuff is what grabs the headlines. That's what the politicians are interested in. But if we really want to get and solve domestic violence, we have to think about how it's happening. And it's happening through financial manipulation and coercive control. and a whole bunch of other means by both men and women, incidentally, that may not come up on the radar of this. So when we think about men's behavior change, people immediately go to physical violence. But recent data, actual data, not headlines, but actual data will show you that where we've had incredible increases in the incidence of domestic violence, we have not seen increases in criminal offences reported, which would suggest that most of it in those areas, the specific areas I speak of, was not physical. So when we think about behavioural change, firstly, are men going to become enamored with the idea that they need to change? Well, no. It's honestly, I can't see how that's a positive spin on creating change in society. What Scott and I are really, and many people that we hang out with, are really, really focused on is getting men to open up dialogues about how they feel, become more comfortable in communicating with how they feel, do so with other men. And we're doing that because that's where the groundswell of frustration comes from, men not or being silent or exploding at the very end of a tether. And that's not the whole reason we're doing it. We're doing it because men are taking their lives at a rate of knots as well. So that's a fundamental issue, and the two things collide, for us. And so we're trying to get men to engage more openly with each other about how they're feeling, what they want to do about it, rather than festering and boiling away on their own. So isolation is the root of evil in that particular context. But I come back to, what are we trying to address here, and how are we going to engage those people?
You're hitting a lot of me at the moment, Scotty. Like, for those who don't really know who I am or what I do, I actually create safe places for men to have big conversations and talk about the things that really matter. Not so much a focus on work, but a focus on their heart stuff. I've sat with hundreds of suicidal men, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
When we continually call each other out, it just pushes us further away from the problem. And like, would you know that today is Mabo Day? Did you know that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And for me, that's got significance, because here we are, a man that dedicated his life to having his people valued, to have his people recognized, to have them feel like they have a place in this world. I look at the Maori culture, and I look at New Zealand, and I look at what they've done. They called in the culture. They called it in. They celebrate the beautiful things, whānau and all the celebrations, the haka, that they've embraced it. So they brought one another in, so they stand together. My opportunity in this is, how do we stop calling each other out and start calling each other in to join in the conversation? How do we do that? I would love some comment in this, because I really feel if anybody turned up, that they were thinking it was going to be quite a very at you conversation, but it's actually not. We actually want to understand things better. We want to. I was at the Frankston Business Collective, Scotty, last week, and it was fantastic. I had so many women come up and go, "Listen, I love what you're doing in our community. We do have good men. How do we let them know?" Because I feel like they're getting bashed everywhere at the moment. And if that's how
I think,
but if that's how our women are feeling, how are our men feeling?
sure. Yeah, absolutely. And, there are a lot of things swung against men's favour in the legal system, family court system, those sorts of things that, to be honest with you, are creating more of a pressure valve, right, in terms of the whole situation. So hang on, I just want to catch this.
Oh,
Yeah, well, So I wish it didn't say LinkedIn user. I'd love to call you out, but you may not want to
Call them
do. I
in,
don't know how
Scotty.
that's happening.
You'd like
It
to
just
call
says
them in, not call them out.
call. Yeah, indeed. Sorry, my bad. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And one of the key things
Can you
about
pop it up, Scotty?
yeah, I will. One of the key things about men today is that many of them don't have, I guess, a role model or a father figure or a way of being a man, even that they observed growing up that they wanted to replicate. Right? That's not to say that their fathers were all assholes or anything like that. Not at all. But there is a model of masculinity and of being a man that certainly in my generation, we've grown up with this inherent understanding that that wasn't quite what we're going for, or that isn't quite what we're going for. It's something different, but what is it? And I think messages like this add confusion, frustration, and probably result in people throwing their hands in the air. So I don't know about the statistics here about those who are raised by their mothers, uh, but
So
making men feel inferior, correct?
yeah. So research shows the majority of most violent crimes against women perpetrated by males. Those males had no fathers or strong male present. I can tell you that 98% of men incarcerated within US prison systems are fatherless men. Right? We live in a world where both mothers and fathers are so important to the growth of our children. So important. They're role modeling to our children how they are meant to turn up in the world. Can you drop that comment? Drop that, please,
Yeah.
Scotty?
So
and I think that's
very true.
Like the human existence is a priceless opportunity, right? It really is, and it encompasses so many different varying experiences, opportunities. I think now more than ever, I have seen men step into fatherhood like never been before. Men are really really being challenged to actually understand their impact upon one another. But like anything, we're going to stumble through it, Scotty. Like this conversation, right? We're going to start the conversation. We're going to stumble through it. I'm prepared to get
and for good reason. For good reason, because let's cards on the table. Like me personally, I find this kind of narrative really frustrating. I think it achieves nothing. I think it pushes men away. It doesn't draw them in. I think it's divisive. I think it creates a melting pot of frustration amongst men that probably results in worse behavior, if truth be known. It creates a perception of men that's very, very harmful to them and their own sense of esteem. It certainly doesn't decelerate the rate of male suicide. That's for damn sure. I don't like any of it, but I work in the social sector. Right? I work in the modern corporate sector. I work in a world where, as a man, I don't get to say that this makes me feel like shit. I'm not allowed to say that. So I nervously approach this conversation for that very specific reason. I have clients out there that would say, God, Scott, why are you saying it? Because it's shit. It's not going to work. It's not effective. And it's divisive. And divisiveness is killing us already as a society, no matter what we're talking about. It's killing us.
So, Scotty, can you just grab that last comment?
Certainly.
Let's pop it up. You and I both know, Scotty, that the men we work with all step up, and the women who those men respect, love them. I'm learning more than anything else is the men that are embracing the opportunity of growth, the men that are stepping in courageously, like the guy I spoke to on the weekend, to take ownership of how he projects. To sit there with his wife and see how much she loved him for going through that, for honouring him, for actually taking on the challenge of, yeah, okay, that's what you were. But this is who you've become. This is the beneficiary of that. And I think it's astounding. And a utopian world for me, Scotty, is a world of love, right? I truly believe that the human existence has been run on fear and control, because we haven't learnt any other ways to deal with things. Our leaders have all gone off to boarding school at the age of 6, and they lost the connection to their love. The parents, they haven't known how to love. What would our world look like if we chose to love and accept each other
Well,
rather than bullying each other apart, right? And I think for me, that's the message I continually hear. Now, I've gotten off mainstream media because I can't stand the projections that continually come at me, right? I just trust that when I meet people, I meet them where they're at, and we have a great conversation. I seek to understand, seek to learn about them and their experience, because that gives me their greatest gift, their presence. Yeah.
yeah.
You got something you need to say there, Scotty? I can see.
Well, I just want to draw people's attention to the similarities about how we think about everything. I mean, one of the reasons that we wanted to do Scots and Socks in the first place is that, and it's systemic in a lot of the work both of us do actually, is the stunning lack of curiosity in society, and curiosity for challenges that people face and for how we address those and what solutions we throw at them. I mean, there's a lot of discussion around kids in their teens today and how they behave. Well, in my day, men drank beer and were, had misogynistic and sexist attitudes and all that sort of stuff. But, I'll take that over growing up in a world where I can be cyberbullied in a millisecond and forced to want to end my life based on stuff that, my God, the world our kids grow up in today is horrendous, right? It's horrendous. And
At first experience about a week.
Sorry?
I had first-hand experience of that a week ago when Oscar got
exactly.
trolled. And then,
So, and so the point is that the point is that whenever we have issues in society we need to address, if we do so with curiosity, we are enabling empathy. And that's the point of us raising this. That is the point of us raising this. The point of us raising this is that you see that kind of the way of addressing the issue and go, in your heart of hearts, that ain't going to work. We're not saying for a moment that domestic violence doesn't need addressing. Of course it does. We are saying that this is grandstanding, politicking, BS that will not achieve an outcome. And in fact, the only outcome it will achieve is further distancing men from the solution that we need to collectively create. Over to you, Mr. Carson.
In this current climate right now, there's a war in Israel against Palestinians. Now,
we're not going.
I didn't know. I'm just going to go there. Right? I didn't know much about it, and I don't know a lot about the Jewish community. And if I just look at the Jewish community, that they're more affluent. They have more successes in lots of areas in life. I didn't know much about them. On Friday, I was gifted the opportunity to go to Shabbat. And it wasn't a normal Shabbat. They had Tom Elliott there speaking, who spoke so well, who addressed the conversation around the fear of where they're at. The thing for me was, here I was, somebody who knew nothing about it other than what was being projected at me. And yet I was in this community of beautiful people that were just trying to do their very best with what they've got.
Mm-hmm.
I was welcomed into the community. And it's probably the greatest gift I could have been given for this entire conversation. Right now, we've got men that just they're struggling. They're really hurting. They're getting smashed in the family courts, absolutely smashed. I don't want to dive into that because I have a pretty, maybe another opportunity to have a conversation around that but here we are, and not knowing, not understanding, created an opinion of other people's voices within my mind, with my mindset. I've been called in, I've been welcomed in to get an understanding, and all I found was joy. I saw where they're hurting right now, but I got to see that they were human. I got to see that they care. I got to see that in life, if we can call each other in and welcome each other in, get through our pain, that's where the beauty is. That's where the growth is. My opportunity for everybody right now is how can we call each other in, human to human? How can I say to you that I'm not okay with what's going on right now, but I respect you. We live in this world together. How can we do that better? Because as humans, we're more alike than we are different. Yet you wouldn't believe that. How do we call each other in, Scotty?
Yeah, very true. And, I think in every facet and every episode we do of this show, we talk about the absence of curiosity. We talk about homeless people or women sleeping rough in cars with their children at Frankston Station. We talk about that stuff all the time. And again and again and again and again, we come back to let's stay curious about why people are there, how hard it's going to be to get out of that situation, and so on and so forth. So if we really want to get to the root cause of domestic violence and nip it in the bud, we have to get to what are the issues underlying, that. What are the ends, in part at the very pointy end of the scale, in part particularly with violent crime and violent domestic violence incidents. Drugs play a big role. Alcohol plays a big role. These things certainly don't help. But there's systemically something deeper than that in the general unhappiness of men or general discontent of men. And that's why we are seeing the suicide rates we're seeing. That's why we are seeing the isolation of men. That's why we are seeing groups of men who've now decided that they're going to formulate a way of life that includes not partnering. Guys just throwing their hands in the air going, no. So, can't say I'm that far away from it myself. But I think, that's a thing in society that we need to address. I'd also argue that a lot of this narrative is unhelpful to women. I'd also argue that a lot of women don't support this narrative. An awful lot of women don't support this narrative. And, they see it as harmful. They don't want men to suffer. And anyone who's got any grace about them whatsoever understands that when anybody in our community, anybody in our family, anybody we care about, work with, live with, love, anyone in our scope that is suffering affects us. Right? So, and what do we need to do about that? We need to figure out ways we can help, we can solve it. And calling out, as you rightly say, Scott, ain't it. I can't see any positive progression coming from this grandstand of a politicized issue, grandstanding of a politicized issue.
What is life about, Scotty? And I'm being serious on this because I look at the projections that come, and I myself, I've had to learn through life that my previous projections weren't great, that my anger and frustration projected out kept people away from me, right?
Sure, same.
When we have anger and fear being projected, people will repel against this. We had an incident with this. We put up somebody who knows us quite well, both of us. Like that's a headline. I'm not playing in that. Well, that's quite interesting because we're both very curious people. We actually want to understand things. That's the projection of man hating mandate. That's how men feel right now. That's how a lot of women are feeling about men. Yeah, and what is life meant to be? What is this opportunity called life? What is it that's going to be at the end of our days, at the end of our life? What are the things that are going to be really important? Is it pulling each other away, pushing each other away, ending up on our own, or pulling us together, uniting us so that we live in heaven? We can either live in hell with regret, shame, and push everybody away with the fear and anger, or we can choose love and acceptance and understanding and then come together. So the end of the day is the end of life. Yeah, our hearts are, because that's what matters. So I'll end up going off on a tangent.
No, fair. Look, guys, here's what we want to encourage, and we'll await your feedback to see how you feel about it. Most of you will watch this after this live. That's generally what happens. But if you could please comment in the event on whatever platform you've come to us, LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. If you can just comment and let us gauge your interest in opening up a dialogue. We're very happy to conduct a very different format of Scots and Socks maybe next week, where we can bring people up and hear from you about how you feel about initiatives, not just this initiative, but initiatives like this that seem to be further dividing us rather than bringing us together around things that need to be solved. So, we really do invite you all to come and let us know on the chat so that Scotty and I know we're not talking about things that aren't of concern to you. But, from what we can see in the media, both sides of the fence, people are saying this is a momentous moment for the Victorian government. And all over the world, media is talking to both the positives, or some are talking the positives, most are talking to the negatives. Most are talking to the negatives, and there's an awful lot of quotes from women who are declaring this an absolute idiocy. And we thought, not that we want to get into this specific issue, not that we are believers in talking about men exclusively or women exclusively, because that's not true. That's not how we roll. But this is, for us, a really big example of where things go wrong, of where narratives can crush souls and the possibility of better things.
So I'm a little bit different to Scotty, because I really do want to get involved in this narrative. I really want to engage in this narrative because I want to understand the impact. I want you to understand the impact of what this projection says to people. Unfortunately, we are guided by the information we take in. Oscar was 7 years old when I changed who I was, because he got the opportunity to see life through a different set of eyes because of the choices that I made. Right now, we're at a time in life where we've got AI coming at us from everywhere. What's real? What's not? What's real? What's not? The one thing that's real more than anything else is how we feel. How we feel controls the way we make decisions. All marketing is based on emotive situations to get you and your attention focused in on this. Today, we were so provocative in what we projected that it created a response within you. What was that response? How did you feel? Let's get into that. Let's get into the understanding of that. Because if we're going to grow as a species and as the beautiful humans that we are, then we've got to open this dialogue. This is what our only way forward for us as humans is to understand each other. Hashtag we together. We together is the only way forward. Any division is not going to work.
I just want to say, Scotty, when I say we're not encouraging a conversation, we're not encouraging a conversation about men exclusively and women exclusively. That's what I'm saying. So, but you're quite right.
Appreciate that, Scotty. We need to have those separate dialogues, right? Because one of the things for me in my work, I'm so tired of women talking at me, right? Because
Sure.
you don't understand my needs, right? When we have so many inside the world of men's health, we need more men involved in men's health so that we can work together to actually create the outcomes rather than being talked at. Men will talk. The narrative that men
Yep.
don't talk
Yes.
is a crock of shit, right?
Uh,
Men do talk. We just need to have the safe places to do it and to practice it so then we can learn to communicate. Evidencing cats in the cradle. My son, who's 13, can communicate better than 99% of men because he's been given the safe place to have a voice, to stumble, to get through things. I don't project. My son doesn't project. He has the opportunity to be him. And I'd love to see what that becomes. I'm sorry, I'm getting.
No.
I just
I
care
think,
about where this goes.
yeah, I get it, and I'm just suggesting that we're not really that at odds at all. But I think that you're quite right. I mean, when I interviewed 100 guys in 100 days a couple of years back, about half of those guys asked me if I could continue a conversation. Now, I was very specifically interviewing them for a book, and I reflected on that and thought, wow, they just want to be heard. All I did was ask them very basic frameworks of questions and let them go. Right? I just let them talk to me. And that opportunity in and of itself was something they really, really valued. And so I think the more opportunities we create like that for men, the better. We don't inherently do it in our friendship circles that well. We are getting better, but we need to get better again. And I think that's going to solve a whole bunch of issues for men and for women, for that matter.
The human race needs to get better. Yeah, we need to get
Absolutely.
better at another. We need to get better at looking after the planet. We need to get better at understanding the impact we have upon one another based upon the decisions we make. We get to that point, then we're going to be in a good place. Until that point, we're going to have the continued suicides. We're going to have the continued domestic violence. It's going to be there until we create safe places and they get a better understanding into one another. Yeah, like I'm going to go. I don't know. Maybe someone's watching. Maybe they're not. The reality for most cases of domestic violence is, why does it happen? What is it like? Because the bloke won't go out and step into other men. He goes to where he's safe to dump his emotions, right? That's where he's safe, and it's shit to know that, right? We make him wrong, it makes it worse. Let's just grab him, and it is wrong. Behaviour's, don't get me wrong, but how do we take him and stop the generational stuff? Because all behaviour is learned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where do we learn it from? Where's our role models? What do we want? And actually, I'm going to go here. I look at our society, right, and I look at the things that are being projected, the video games, the blokes' advice, right? I look at blokes' advice on Facebook, where, for every post, they're going to put up a photo of a young woman, scantily clad, right? The boys like that as they get around it. How would you feel if that was your daughter? Just out of curiosity. How would you feel if folks were posting up your daughter? And I look at what our values are and how we value each other these days. We value each other. Guys value themselves with a dick pic. Girls value themselves when they go out. What do they? How do you dress? How do you? And I get this. What are you selling? What are you advertising? How do you want to be known? Do you want to be known for who you are in here, who you are externally? And I'm passionate. I'm passionate about it.
No, of course. As am I. I've probably just got a bit more to lose. No, that's true. And listen, sincerely, like, if you are interested in having an open dialogue about it, we'd be super keen to facilitate that, because it is incredibly important that we are inclusive and that we, to Scott's point, are calling people in on issues like this, not calling people out. So if you're happy to wrap up there, Scotty, so am I. And we hope to hear from you in the chat comments. And we'll see you next week. Bye for now.
Ciao.
Hey.
Well, still live, Scotty.